You are not going to traumatize your child. It is what you make of it, right?
Yeah.
Sleep training is what you make of it.
Hey mamas, welcome back to another episode of the Energized Mama podcast. Whether you find yourself clicking on my podcast for the first time or if you're one of the tribe already, I just want to say thank you so much for joining me here today because you are in for a treat. You know, especially if you're new to the podcast, ultimately my heart, my desire, why I wanted to create this podcast was really to have a space out there that exists to help you, moms like you, moms of littles, moms who are just trying to keep up with everyday life, to help you feel more energized in your mom life so that ultimately you can love the life that you have with your kids, but also then have a life outside our kids. You know, that's really hard to do when you are just barely surviving through the day. Maybe you've been there, maybe you're there right now where you wake up feeling exhausted, maybe you're feeling overwhelmed, you've got all these things on your plate, right? Well, this is exactly why I also created my program that perfectly aligns with this podcast where we go dive deep. My students and I, we talk about drainers because what I would consider to be a drainer is anything that takes away from your everyday energy. We think sometimes we know what drains us, but it's always those underlying things, the things that are underneath the surface or the things that we just consider to be normal. And we just don't even know that it's something that we can actually fix. And one of the biggest drainers that my students continually tell me that come up time and time again in their life is a lack of sleep. Right? Like who has not been there as a mom? Nobody is born with that perfect newborn that just immediately sleeps through the night. Some of us get that rude awakening months later when that perfect sleeper all of a sudden is like the wild and crazy guy at night. What's hard about the sleep is that there's so much in motherhood, like sleeping patterns, that we cannot control. But you know, there are also things about specifically sleep that sometimes we can control. We just don't even realize that we're setting ourselves up to fail. And it's hard to sometimes know how to go about whether it's sleep training or how to help yourself and ultimately your children get more sleep. So that is why I invited an expert on this podcast today. Her name is Sarah Nagar, and she is a pediatric sleep coach. She has an amazing company called A Little Sleep, and she's literally helped hundreds of families just like yours worldwide, help them sleep better, smoother, and actually get that energy back from simply just getting more sleep. Without further ado, I would love you guys to help me welcome my guest today, Sarah Nagar.
The Energized Mama podcast, a place where we explore together how to raise those littles to know the Lord while growing in your own intimacy with Jesus, learning how to keep your energy while handling the inevitable stress, and rediscovering yourself outside of motherhood. It is possible. Let's do it together.
Mommy. Mama. Energized Mama. Yeah. You might do.
Sarah, oh my gosh, I feel like I can speak for myself and my entire audience that we are all so blessed that you're here today with us.
Thank you. I'm really happy to be here, and I feel honored that you invited me. And this is definitely a topic that could be hours of conversation, and I know so many moms can relate to this, and dads too, by the way. I work with tons of dads as well, and I just feel that there's so much to say about it. So I'm excited to see where this conversation goes and to see how I can give you the best knowledge, the best experiences that I've had, some stories maybe if we have time, all the things.
Thanks. Well, what a beautiful just position of your heart to want to be here to help, to serve. And I love that you said stories because we're big fans of stories here on this podcast. And before we dive into, helping our mamas learn more how to get better sleep in their household, would you really quickly just tell us a little bit about yourself and especially give us a little story about you and your family? Where are you guys at? How many kids do you have?
That is a loaded question. I'm going to try and make it really, really short. So I am a mom of 4. I have 3 boys and a little girl. They're 10, 7, 6, and 3, really quick. We have lived all over. I live in Florida right now. We've lived everywhere, all over the map. I'm born and raised in Los Angeles. I don't know if you want to hear about my husband. He was born and raised in Israel. He grew up in Brooklyn. We've lived in New Orleans. We've lived in Israel. We've lived sort of everywhere. And what was your other question? I don't even remember what you said.
No, you
Sorry.
did. No, it's all good. It's such a hard question. Like you said, loaded when, you ask a mom, like, tell us about your kids. And it's like, oh my
Yeah.
gosh, where do I begin?
Right.
Where do I go? But
Okay.
what I love about your story though, is that you definitely showed us like how versatile and kind of like a global citizen, I feel like you've become just from like the different
You too.
places. Yeah, it's kind of crazy. I mean, the one thing I love is that you start off by saying that you're in Florida, because I am too now.
No, I know.
It's
That
like
is true.
all these places we've lived. We've even followed each other. I at one time lived in your hometown in LA, and
We have an overlap, which is
yes,
the universe brings people together
Yes.
in very serious ways. And I really believe that.
yes, yes.
And
I couldn't believe it.
Yeah, go ahead. Sorry.
No, I couldn't agree more.
I wanted to add one more thing, and I know a lot of people ask me this, so maybe it's relevant, but how did I get into this? And maybe that's part of your original question or initial question of like where I am right now and what I'm doing. And this was started out as a hobby for me. I was really just helping moms because I had learned to help myself, because my first son was sort of like a disaster sleeper. It was really, really hard. I'm sure we'll get into it, the whys and the hows. And it really started out as a hobby. I loved it so much. I was helping moms left and right, and it was just so rewarding. And it kind of like took off from there. So that's how I got here and where I am in a nutshell.
Yeah, I mean, when you said 4 kids, I was like, oh man, moms listening, we know she can relate, especially knowing that you've got kids. Before we started recording, we were talking about how your kids need you so differently with the ages you've got. You have, one as old as 10 and then one as young as 3. And it's like, sleep is also not linear, right? It doesn't just one day get fixed and everything's perfect. I also talk with some moms that are struggling, and maybe some listening have kids that are a little older that are like, my kid used to sleep through the night, now they're having night terrors, or they're struggling with bedwetting. But it's interesting because as much as it's such a mom thing to always focus on our kids, right? Like we always are like diving out there, like Googling, how to help my kids get more sleep, how they sleep through the night. I think we sometimes forget how important sleep is for us. And so that's where I kind of just want to ask you real quickly, from your now expertise as being a sleep coach, and I know your title is even right, like a pediatric sleep coach, but we know that when you help some family help their children sleep through the night, you're ultimately helping these parents as well sleep through the night. So why is sleep so important for parents, would you say?
That's a really good question. Sleep is, we all know it's like a basic human need. It is part of Maslow's hierarchy of needs, which I think has actually been changed since. But they changed the order, not necessarily the needs. And sleep is on there. It's essential. It is, like it affects all aspects of our mental health, our physical health. And as cliche as it is, sleep is the best medicine. It is like the cure all, really. When there's a problem, you know how they say go sleep it off?
Yeah.
It applies to almost everything. Obviously we need other things as well, but sleep deprivation really trickles into every aspect of your life. It affects your own ability to concentrate, which then also trickles into your ability to concentrate on your children, and then your spouse and your house and work and everything else that relates to being a mom and whatever it is in your day to day. And there's just so many benefits to sleep. I'm happy to go into some specifics if you want me to, but really it's just a domino effect. If we don't sleep, we don't feel well, we don't function well, and we don't comprehend. It affects our memory retention. There's so many things that it, can unfold. That's really why it's so important. And my point in saying that is it affects children and babies the same way that it affects adults. And even more so, it is so imperative for kids because they're growing day to day. Adults kind of hit this like sort of plateau, like we're also always growing, but we kind of cap it at some point. Our brain continues to grow, but for children, it's amazing for brain and growth development, cognitive development, social, emotional, everything, behaviors, and the list goes on and on and on. So it's definitely be important for adults and children alike.
You know, something that I love that you brought up when you first started sharing about that was you brought up the Maslow's hierarchy of needs. And I think too many parents don't focus on that one little word, need, and don't even see sleep as a need. I mean, I think we all know, like you said, we're so impacted when we don't get it. But I feel like when I talk with a lot of parents, they don't prioritize their sleep. They try to prioritize their children's sleep. It's almost like, you know, when moms almost just feel like, oh, well, it's normal to be exhausted. I'm just supposed to be exhausted, you know?
Par for the poor.
Yeah, right? It's like, oh, no one sleeps the first couple years. And it depends on your norms too, right? Yeah. Like I can only imagine like with, especially your experience with working with families all over the world, there's like different mentalities and thoughts with sleep. And I used to nanny for about 10 years when I was in LA. So I encountered all kinds of norms when it came to sleep. And it was just really funny to see how different people, what they accepted into their homes or what was their normal, and even talking with the moms about it, like, hey, how did you learn this sleep pattern or training? Sometimes it was something that their mom suggested, something that was their normal as a kid. And so I know that there's moms maybe listening, you know, they know the benefits of sleeping well, you know, for themselves and for their kids. They may have apprehensions to say sleep training or just helping, right? You know, because I think it is a loaded word and there's a lot of different ways you can sleep train. I've even talked with women in more of, say, like a natural health minded community. I'm a home birthing mom, so I'm around a lot of crunchy moms, and some think like sleep training is just too rigid, it's too much of a routine. And then there's the other side of some parents who just think it's just too hard. I can't do it. I don't want to be bothered by it. So I want to ask you, as the expert, Sarah, what would you say are some of the biggest misconceptions that you hear that people have towards helping their kids sleep better?
Okay, so what I will say is sleep training is by far, like the crying during sleep training is the biggest encumbrance. It's the biggest thing the roadblock that tells parents, no, this is not for me. I'm not doing it. And they come to me with things, like you said, like misconceptions, like it's going to traumatize my child. It'll ruin the special bond we have, the attachment, long-term emotional trauma, you name it. And I understand the sentiment and I appreciate where it comes from, because when moms come to me, I want them to know that I'm not there to not listen to them and try and change their mind. I'm there to provide them with information about how we can strengthen the attachment and the bond and also have great sleep. Not to tell them like, oh, it's not true, you're wrong. I definitely bring them a lot of literature, and I do explain to them off the bat that sleep training does not equate a cry it out method. Cry it out is not sleep training. Crying basically is not cry it out. There's two different things. Cry it out is a method. Crying is a form of expression, which all babies, all children, all adults have. To tell a baby or a child not to cry is unrealistic.
Yeah.
So that's why I really aim very much so to separate the two, because there's cry it out and then there's crying. Crying is a form of expression. Your baby is frustrated. Your baby wants something, right? And we're not ignoring your baby. We're making sure they have all their needs met. And I always say, when parents come to me concerns about the crying, I always say, what do you do when your child cries? When your toddler falls off of a bike? When your 6-year-old needs help with homework? Do you run to do the homework for your child? Do you run? Of course, you pick your toddler up when they fall. You're not going to be like, oh, you're fine. You got this. You know, we want to always acknowledge their feelings in the situation, but you pick them up, you tell them we're going to try again, and you tell them they can do it, and they get back on the bike, and you may push the bike for a minute, but you hold their hand through it until they learn how to ride that bike independently. And it's the same thing with sleep. It's the same thing as dropping your child off at daycare for the first time. It's a process. And I always say, what are we doing with that crying? And the reason I'm telling you this is because it answers your question. How do you sort of, help, moms understand or clarify those misconceptions? And this is giving you that perspective without all the literature, which I'm happy to go over with you as well. I have it here. Really, we want to walk them through it and tell them that you are not going to traumatize your child. It is what you make of it, right? Yeah. Sleep training is what you make of it. We're not here to traumatize them and leave them all night long to cry. That could be traumatic. Yeah. That's not what sleep training is, though. Yeah. That's not what we do.
I'm over here basically taking notes and thinking that was an amazing analogy though, because it is amazing. I find so often that we can compartmentalize sleep and not think of it as like you just so beautifully painted and portrayed. It is almost like anything else. And we do want our children to be like independent thinkers. We want them to be brave when they do fall down. There's something about sleep that sometimes we forget, but yes, we want them to be independent sleepers as well and to feel that empowerment. It's funny, Sarah. So as you were speaking, I can just imagine some moms listening because, gosh, I've been there, maybe rolling their eyes a little bit or kind of saying like, yeah, but Sarah, you don't know my kid. Listen, I've tried those things. I've heard those good things. I think sometimes the struggle is speaking from my own experience. I'm a second time mom. So I had a really great first sleeper and all the things that I looked up online, they say to do for inducing good sleeping habits, we did, and it worked with him. It was great, but now I'm on like the total struggle bus with my second, and I know other moms get that too. And it's like with anything, some kids, certain disciplines work and others don't, certain kids, feeding, like some are great eaters, some struggle there. So I know the same thing with kids. So I'm wondering, since I kind of have this sleep expert on my podcast, if I could just pick your brain for a minute, share what's going on and just see what you suggest, because I'm definitely like a practical and tactical, I love how you've already broke it down. And I'm like, you know what? Here we have this struggle with this issue. And I know that we do learn, you said so beautifully at the beginning of the episode, that we really do learn so much through stories. So I'm hoping by sharing a little bit of my story that there's another mom out there that'll be like, oh my gosh, yes, I've been there. I've tried that, and then also just getting to see so much of what value you give and that you offer.
Sure. Go ahead. Let's hear it.
So here we go. My second son is Nakoa. He's about 10 and a half months old and he has never slept through the night. And I know different people categorize what does sleeping through the night actually mean. And so he's really never slept more than like 5 hours at a time. I think some of that has really been affected, probably all of it has been affected by that. When he was 3 months old, we immigrated from Belgium to the US and we're now living in my parents' home. And so in the very beginning, when we first wanted to try to kind of sleep train him, there were just a lot of hands that were like wanting to carry him and wanting to feed him and wanting to put him to sleep. And so he didn't really have the best routine. And something that's been so different than with our first son, who I always said was like a great sleeper. Our first son was born during COVID, so there wasn't a lot of action. There wasn't a lot going on. His life was very slow. He had his own little kind of nursery nook and next to our bedroom, where now Nakoa actually is sleeping in a bedroom with my husband and I and his almost 4-year-old brother. Some adjustments we've made. We have been trying. We've been trying to do the things, and so in our bedroom now we have these long blackout curtains that actually like go around his bed. We bought these pole things from Amazon and we put that by his bed. He has a sleep machine. As far as his sleep regimen is, he's like sleeping like 1 to 2 naps a day. He sometimes is already going down to 1 nap. And I was like, he's way too young to be going down for 1 nap, but that's sometimes what he's doing. He goes to bed by a bottle, which is not something I really want to do. It's something that we have been kind of doing, to be honest, out of survival mode. Even honestly in the middle of the night, because he's still getting up 3 times a night or so. Him having a bottle is the one thing that settles him. And we want to try not to wake up our 4-year-old and then our 15-year-old who's sleeping next door. And when we wake him up, we try to change him because we've noticed before that because he's, I think, having so much milk that he gets really wet. So if we don't change him, he wets himself and that sometimes wakes him up. And I think the only other thing I would share with you is, and then I'll shut up and let you talk and hear what you have to say. He's been a really crazy teether. We've kind of been in that situation of wanting to wait till his teething is done and then try to sleep train him in some way. It just feels like he teethes for weeks on end and then he finally starts to sleep a little better and he seems to not be in pain. And then within a week, he's like teething again. So that's been consistent for months. It's been really hard. Just again, he's having a fever or he's chewing on his fingers, all the teething typical symptoms. And now he has, I think, almost 8 teeth. So this boy, he's like really ready to chomp. It just makes it hard for us because we want to do kind of the cry it out method. I know that you talked about the crying versus cry it out. Like we want to do cry it out. And we've thought of some things like even having our toddler sleep with my parents for a week or so as we try. I'm going to stop talking because I'm sure already from what I've shared, you probably have some things either to ask or to share. So what do you think? Are we without help? Are we doomed?
No, you're not doomed for the rest of your days. Don't worry about it. You can definitely change around your routine. And I always tell parents, and this is I love your story because it kind of covers a lot of aspects. You're not just dealing with one child in your room, but you have two.
Right.
And I always ask the parents first, what is your goal? Do you want to share a room with your children, or is your goal to move them out? Is your goal to effectively, functionally keep them in your room, but have them sleeping? So we break down the goals, then we talk about strategies, right? Because you need to know why you're doing it and what you're doing in order to create a plan to kind of accommodate and fit that goal. So that would be the first question I would ask you. So what is your goal? Do you want to keep him in your room? Let's just have like a mini consult here. Let's just pretend like a mini consult, just kind of give them a little bit of a taste.
Yeah. I love it. I am so blessed. Our ultimate goal would be to have both of our sons sleep outside of our room and to have definitely in the future have them share a room. We're just in the tough predicament where we've really had to, I think, relinquish and surrender some of those desires because where we're living right now, we're all in a room, not really because we want to. So that's what's hard is like our goal is to get them out of the room, but right now there's nowhere in our space to put them. And we think we're going to be in this living situation for probably about another year. So potentially until Nakoa is almost 2. That's our reality. And that's what we're also trying to face is to figure out how can we make this work if we need to be here in one room until our sons are almost 2 and almost 5.
So I just want to preface by saying that we lived with my parents also for a couple of years. So another overlap.
Yeah.
It was in between and after medical school, and we were back and forth, and we stayed at my parents for about 2 years.
Yep.
My mom's in LA for 2 years, and I totally get the living situation. I was fortunate enough to be able to move one kid out of my room. I had one kid in my room for a while, and then I moved 2 kids out. We eventually crammed them in a room together because it's just what I realized that I needed.
Yeah.
But I get it. You work with what you have and you make do, and there's always a solution. So if you are a family who lives in a 1-bedroom and you have 2 or 3 kids, you can make it work. Sometimes once in a blue moon, I'll say, okay, let's move the easiest sleeper out into the living room for 2 days. It's not, I don't want to do that,
right.
But or you move out. I'll tell the parents, like, if we really can't accomplish what we want in the same room with the children and husband and whoever, then someone should move out for a couple of days. It is temporary. So whether that's you or an easier sleeper, someone who's not going to mind, and then it's a little bit more effective. But that's like an if we get to that, situation, if you do hit a wall and you need to do that. So my second question, now that I'm sort of focusing and getting back on track, is you want me to walk you through those things that you mentioned and help you figure out the best way to fix them, overcome them. Is that what you're asking me?
I mean, as best as
with the bottle. Yeah,
just as best as possible. I mean, what I already love about your approach, and I'm taking notes over here, so I'm sure people can hear me go do 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 do. What I love about your approach is that you're very much like not a one-stop. You're a one-stop shop as in like everyone can come to you, but you're not like a cookie cutter, like everybody gets the same message. This has to work for everybody. I love that you start with the goals. And so ultimately, I mean, my ultimate goal, and again, it's like you can maybe help me see how realistic it is. I would just love our little one to sleep through the night because our other guy, our toddler, he's almost 4, he sleeps really great. He's actually a pretty rock hard sleeper, and so we're kind of like, he could probably sleep through some crying, but it's like, do we want him to? Do we want to go down that path? I'm a very light sleeper. I think ever since being pregnant the first time, I'm just like, mama bear, what's going on? How can I help? I want to make sure I'm doing everything I can to set us up to succeed. So if there's something you heard me say that you're like, oh, that might be why he's still getting up all the time, or even if
that helps clarify.
I already know I'm going to be like calling you up for an official consult here soon. But as far as just the things that maybe that's where we'll start, is the things that I shared. Is there any red flags or anything that you're like, hey, if you made maybe this one little adjustment that you could see that working towards my goal that I would like?
Well, the first thing I'll say, and I'll give moms a little tip here at the end, because I definitely heard somewhere in there, I'm like, ooh, I can give them a tip here.
Good.
So we'll save it for the end. The first thing I want to address is the bottles in the middle of the night. So at this point, at 10 months old, he's waking up obviously out of, not obvious, but I'm pretty confident that he's waking up out of habit and not out of hunger.
Yeah.
And I talked about this a ton this week on my Instagram and last week, because I've gotten so many questions, and this is where parents get stuck with sleep training, and not in a judgmental way, not in, God forbid, not in anything like that. But this is where parents get stuck. It's the middle of the night. It's more so even than dealing with the initial crying of sleep training. No matter what method you're using, they get through that, whatever. It may not have been easy, but then they get stuck in the middle of the night. This is where it can really make or break your sleep training, or make or break, the idea that your baby is or isn't going to wake up all throughout the night. So he's waking up and he's expecting that bottle, right?
Yes.
That's what you said. He has bottles at night. And there's really a few ways to go about it. And that's really the first place I would start, is figuring out, how to get rid of those bottles, because that is going to be the one thing that is going to make him sleep through the night. Is he's not going to be waking up for those bottles, and he'll be able to sleep from bedtime till morning. At his age, we're pretty confident that it's not a hunger issue that he's waking up because of. So we really want to figure out a process of how we're getting rid of those bottles. Parents always hear the words getting rid of and they get scared. They get, oh no, what if my baby's hungry? What if it's mean? What if it's X, Y, and Z? And I always tell them, we're not getting rid of it, we're replacing it. We're taking those bottles and we're saying, hey, you don't need these at night anymore. Let's move them somewhere before bedtime. So anywhere in your 12-hour period from morning to night is where you're going to move those bottles, so that he doesn't need those bottles at night. And you might be sitting there thinking like, oh, but he already has all those bottles during the day and he has them at night. So then I would tell you, okay, great. He for sure doesn't need them, and then you really can't get rid of them. If your baby is taking in all the bottles during the day and then some, then you really don't need to worry about a hunger issue. And you really just need to focus now on the habit, kicking the habit. We would do a weaning process. I often implement this with babies who are drinking, let's say, more than 2 ounces or for more than 2 minutes at the breast if you're breastfeeding. That's my criteria for if we are going to implement a weaning process. And it's a nice way to slowly teach your baby's body that he doesn't actually need those calories at night, instead of taking it away cold turkey and then he's wondering like, where's my bottle? And then he might be crying 10 times harder. So it's a nice way to eliminate tears. It's a gradual approach to training the body that it really doesn't need that food at night. And that's where I would start. I would definitely implement a weaning process. If you want me to go into how to do that, I'm happy to. I know it's information overload sometimes with this, but that's where I would start in terms of the bottles. We want to move them to daytime feeding, maybe offer them in sippy cups during the day, offer it at meal times. Something that I love to tell moms to do for this age specifically is use the bottle as a way to connect with your baby before bedtime. And if you're already doing that, then take that quality time with your baby where you offer them that bedtime bottle and make it really, really count. Even if it's a 2-minute bottle feeding, make it count so that when you put your baby to sleep and he or she does wake up in the middle of the night, you're not feeling guilty that you are not giving them that bottle. You can tell yourself, it's a mantra.
Right.
I've given my child emotional love, connection, food, right? So a physical need. He doesn't need the bottle. We've done our weaning process and he's capable of going back to sleep. So A, it's good for the child. You're connecting with him before bedtime, and B, it's good for you because you get to connect and it gives you that peace of mind and the confidence. I stress this a lot, confidence. You need the confidence to tell yourself your baby can sleep and your baby does not need those bottles in the middle of the night in order to be successful and carry on with sleep training and sort of meet the goal that you set out for yourself.
Yeah.
So that's in terms of the bottles, and of course it trickles down into other aspects because that is the main thing. Like we want to eliminate that's a sleep prop for him. We want to make sure he's waking up and able to go back to sleep, which is our goal. We want to teach him that when he pops his his eyes open at 2 a.m., he can quickly go back to sleep, even if it's with a 1-minute pat on the back or a quick, shh, mommy's here, I love you, we're going to snuggle in the morning and I'm right here. And then he goes right back to sleep.
Okay, you're literally reading my mind, because that was going to be one of my other questions is like, okay, it's like mentally I get the weaning, I get the taking away the bottle, but then it's like that feeling of, since he's become so used to it, it's like, then what do we do? You know, what do we, but I love that you basically said like giving a little pat, reassuring him like it's going to be okay. I love already, I'm a big practical person. So I love that these are like real practical steps, and something that I feel like you just also gave moms and myself permission to do is like, hey, know that this is not going to be an overnight process. Even the word weaning, when we think about what does weaning mean, there's so many different applications for that word. And we think about that does mean like a slow, gradual process. It's just like weight loss, right? It's like, you don't want it to happen. We may want it to happen all at once, but then it's not going to stay off. Nakoa, my son, and I think so many moms that again are in my groups and they have these grievances about sleep. It's like, well, at the end of the day, motherhood is not, it is forever. And you are there for your child long term. So it's like, we do want them to be set up for life and for also ourselves too, to be able to do this long term. So I know that this is definitely something I can work with, you know, because I kind of felt like, oh my gosh, is Sarah going to have me like change all the things and do all the things? And I love that you gave me like, hey, one, let's focus on this first step. Let's get moving there. And then we can move on the next one.
And another thing I wanted to add with weaning, because you just reminded me, is when I also said, you know, getting rid of, using those words that kind of like instill some fear or whatever in moms, we want to make sure that we're replacing that. Not make sure, but if you want to look at it as replacing one sleep prop for another. So if looking at it as getting rid of the bottle is too harsh or too daunting or too much work or whatever word you want to insert there, you can replace it with something else. And I often recommend this to moms who want to take a more hands-on and more gradual, I like the word gradual here is going to keep coming up, but a more gradual approach to sleep training. And that is, let's replace the bottle with something else. And then whatever you're replacing it with, let's say that's a hug or a pat on the back or a song, is going to be easier to wean your child off of that when the time comes, because he's not as connected to it as he was to the bottle. So that habit that we're kind of replacing it with is going to be, it's like sort of in their short-term memory. So it's a habit they're latching on to, but it's going to be easier to get rid of. So that's why if moms want to do that, they definitely can. And then when they're ready to get rid of whatever they've sort of replaced it with, it's a much easier habit to kick because it's not ingrained in their brain.
That makes so much sense. So much sense. And that's what it is I think sometimes we just need someone that has an experience like yours, an expertise like yours, and just can remind us that it's going to be okay. I think that's also something that's so powerful about who you are and the work that you do. And just as moms in general, that we just know that also nothing lasts forever, as much as it really can feel so forever. Just knowing that, okay, he will not be on the, because that's always, you know, that's sometimes, hold on. It's not always, I even have to watch my own words, right? It's like the more and more, the older I get, I'm just like, gosh, what words am I speaking out over myself and my kids? So I had never thought of a mom mantra that you would say like in the middle of the night. I'm like, oh my gosh, that is so powerful. But you know, sometimes it does feel like this will never change. He will always need his bottle. I'm picturing him at 5 years old, like 10 years old.
No.
Right. But that's what's awesome is like having a conversation with you, listening to a podcast like this, it really can center us. What is the reality of our situation, taking a breath and really then getting those strategic steps moving forward. So I know I feel better. I feel so good after talking with you. I took a bunch of notes and I know that I can like bring this to my husband immediately and say, hey baby, we've got a little bit of a path moving forward. How can we work this into our family's routine? How can we align it with our needs and move forward? So Sarah, I've so enjoyed our conversation. You know, I feel like we could just keep going about so many topics. And so I hope that you would do me the honor of coming back on my podcast. But before we say goodbye today, I want to make sure that, you know, any mom listening that is just kind of at her wit's ends and is really struggling with, you know, sleeping, helping her children sleep, and they would love to chat with you, what's the best way that they can connect with you after this episode?
They can reach me on Instagram. You'll leave my handle. And so people can see it, and they can reach me on my website, alittlesleep.com. You'll have all of that there. And I will also leave a phone number if you want to message me, chat on WhatsApp. And can I just say one thing quickly before we sign off?
No.
Just to leave the final
Absolutely.
last note.
No, please.
Okay, I'm hanging up. I'm
done. No, please do, because I'm sure it's going to be great. So go for it.
I know. I took some notes that I really wanted, parents to know. And one thing is that sleep is not a luxury. People tell us whether it was their experience or they want to make us feel better, and it doesn't, but sleep is not a luxury. It's a necessity. It's something that we need. It's something that we all need. And I think that was kind of relevant to what we were talking about in the beginning of the importance of sleep. You don't have to be sleep deprived. You do not have to live in this constant state of sleep deprivation. Yes, it might be a phase, but at what cost? And what does short-term mean? It's all relative. When you say, oh, it's a short-term phase, I have people with 7 and 8-year-olds that come to me for sleep help because they've never really figured it out, or they didn't know how, or whatever the reason is, they weren't ready. It doesn't matter. But I want them to know that you don't have to be sleep deprived. Sleep is not perfect. We're not aiming for perfection when it comes to sleep training. I think that's also really important. We're aiming for functional. We're aiming for effective, and we basically aim for whatever you want sleep to be that works in your household so that everybody is happy. And it's not, like you said earlier, it's not this like cookie cutter, like, oh, we're going to sleep 12, 13 hours a night and that's sleep training. That's what somebody else might want, but that's not always realistic. So we're not aiming for perfection. And that's really what I wanted to leave everybody with. Thank you so much for having me. This was awesome. And I can go on and on and on and on. So
no, but that's great because you're helping so many moms feel so seen right now and feel so heard, because sleep is one of those things, like you said, that I do think in general people find as a luxury. And it's kind of one of those things that people talk about, but they really don't. It's kind of one of those off the shoot things. Oh yeah, we're not sleeping. I only slept 3 hours last night. And almost like we get a badge for being exhausted. But I love that you said, no. That is not what we should be shooting for. That's not what you have to accept. And that sleep really is a necessity. And it is something that every mama deserves. And so I am just so happy that you came on here with such an open heart. And that if you're considering, I don't know, do I reach out to Sarah? What do I think? Please do it. She's the most warm, welcoming person. We ourselves actually haven't met in person yet, but we met through Instagram. And I just knew that with just your approach to sleeping, with your approach to life and how kind and open you are, I know I had to have you on my podcast just to bless every single mom that's, listening to you right now. So again, thank you so much for being here. And I look forward to starting to put your tips into action and being one of your success stories.
Thank you so much. I appreciate it.
You're welcome. And every mama out there listening, just be reminded by, Sarah's words and also my words. You guys are so valuable that don't ever feel like you're not worth it. Your children love you so much, and you really are the best mom when you take good care of yourself, which includes giving yourself those needs and making sure that you pay attention to those needs. And one of those needs is absolutely sleep. And if you also need community, if you feel like I don't have women that I connect to that I can just get raw and real with, please head down to the show notes at the bottom of this episode and you can come join my private Facebook community where I help moms connect with other like-minded moms who love God, who love the deeper things of life, who want to grow in faith, but also feel energized in their mom life so that they can be the best mom that they can be, so that they can fulfill the desires on their hearts of what they want to do and who they want to be as a mom, but also beyond. Come join us. Thank you so much for listening to another episode, and we'll see you on the next one here at the Energized Mama podcast. Big virtual hug, mamas.